Imagine for a minute that you're a social worker in a hospital, and one of the people in the hospital that you work with just had a baby. And you went to visit her, and there she is with the baby, and you look at the baby and you say, "Oh, what a beautiful baby." And this woman says, "It's not a beautiful baby. It's an ugly baby. It's an ugly baby." And she tries to put it under the covers in the bed. And the next day you come by and the same thing happens. And she says, "It's not a beautiful baby. It's an ugly baby." And she tries to cover it with the pillow. And every doctor that goes in there and says the same thing about her baby, that's what she says. So what do you think you might think as a social worker if that happened? What might you be thinking about this woman? Any thoughts? Nathaniel's laughing.
I don't know. I don't know.
Oh, she doesn't want people to say how beautiful it is because then it could bring bad luck. Some
Okay.
people have those religious beliefs.
Okay, okay, good. So what else might you think if you didn't? Go ahead, Sarah, and then.
Maybe she's just hurting about something. Something is bothering
Okay.
her, and she.
Okay, and what if as a social worker that your job was to sort of make sure that parents were not hurting their children and that they weren't abusing their children in any way? What might you think?
I think that there's some
Yeah.
different issue there that might.
Okay, this is actually a true story, and what happened was this woman was reported for child abuse because she was trying to put the child under the covers and put the pillow over the child, and nobody could understand, and it was this beautiful baby. Well, the point is that this woman was from Southeast Asia, and one of the issues, very similar to what you're saying, Nathaniel, one of the issues in her culture was that there was an evil spirit that would steal the soul of beautiful babies. So, of course, once you know that, then how do you see the mother? You see the mother as a very protective, absolutely, very protective, caring mom, okay? So when we don't have the information about a culture, then it's very difficult to make a judgment or an assessment about someone, okay? And, you know, I think it's a great example. In fact, I realized it when I came in, when I went to shake your hand, because I know that part of your culture is not having females touch the males, right?
Normally I would explain it, but I figured that
But I
you would
totally
understand.
forgot because a friend of mine who I met through doing some work with your community, I got really friendly with her, and turns out her husband went to college with my son, and when I met the husband, I went to hug him, and he was, "Oh, no, no, no." So you know, but it was great. I didn't know that before. So otherwise, I might judge, hey, you're being kind of standoffish. So it's really important to understand what the various aspects of different cultures are and what that means, okay? So let me introduce myself. My name is Kathy Painter. Don't worry about how to pronounce the last name because you'll never get it right. Just Kathy is fine, and I have my information there, so I'm not going to bore you with a bunch of stuff about my background and so forth, but I am a psychologist by training, and I'm a coach, a life coach and an executive coach. So, but I'm here today representing Nonprofit Help Desk in New York, and offering this workshop on diversity. To really help you understand yourself better, it's very hard to understand other cultures if we don't have a good, clear understanding of our own self-awareness around other cultures and being sensitive to other cultures. So really the objective is to help us look at ourselves and then develop some skills so that we can interact effectively and sensitively with folks from other backgrounds and cultures. And we're going to talk about, I don't know all of the people with whom you interact in this office. So we're going to talk about that and be able to really apply all of the stuff you're going to learn to your day-to-day interactions with people. We're also going to have a second one in January. So whatever we don't accomplish today, because we got started a little late, so we may not get to everything that I had planned today. We'll continue that when we meet in January with, also it's going to be the group from healthcare, which will be good. That'll be good. Bigger the group, the better. We get a lot better interaction and more interaction, so that's really good. Okay, so the way that we're going to accomplish this objective is we're going to look at three things. This is going to help it so that you can be more sensitive. And first we're going to look at the whole concept of cultural sensitivity, like what is it? What does it mean? So forth. As I mentioned, we're going to look at awareness of self and awareness of others. How do we go about developing that in ourselves? And lastly, we're going to look at new skills. We're going to talk about some actual skills, some things that we can do to help improve relationships with and understanding between cultures. okay? Okay, so I think it's really important. Let me just give you an idea of how we're gonna work today, because it's a really small group, and I like to be informal. I like to have fun. If I can't have fun, I don't like doing these things. So I'm hoping we're gonna have fun today, and I hope you guys feel the same, because we're gonna be here all day, and it could be like totally boring if I'm up here talking all day. You'd be like, oh my gosh. So we're going to do a bunch of different things. I am going to talk a little bit in the beginning about, just so that we get our terms correct, terms we're going to be using throughout the day. But then I really want to have us be doing some things, because that's how you learn. It's not about me just up here talking. So, but I want to set an atmosphere where you feel comfortable and you feel open, because this is about self-awareness and other awareness. So it's really important that we do so. So let's look first at this whole, what do we mean by culture? Okay, I mean, this is just, and you guys have all this stuff in your handouts, but basically a culture consists of many things. It consists of values, norms, traditions, customs, but all of those things determine how you think, how you as a group, the group to which you belong, how you think, how you make decisions, how you make judgments, how you interact with others, how you see other people, how you see the world. What is your world view? Okay, that's what that all comes from culture. That's a definition of culture. Okay, it differs a little bit with ethnicity, okay? And ethnicity is more the group from which an individual is descended and from which they derive their sense of peoplehood, okay? That identification with a certain group, okay? That you have a sense of your personhood. So it's a little bit different from culture. Okay, so what is this whole idea of cultural sensitivity? We hear this word all the time, but there's no such thing as all of a sudden you have cultural sensitivity. Okay, it's a continuum. It's something that we're always working on developing. As you interact with new cultures, you learn something new, and so then you know how to interact in the future. But it's about recognizing differences between cultures, valuing those differences, and not making judgments about those differences. Okay, nothing's right or wrong or good or bad, just different. But you move beyond that idea of just differences, and you view all clients or all people with whom you're interacting as individuals, as recognizing their differences, their beliefs, their values, their languages. All of those things affect how they see the world. Okay, and it's really hard because we all come from our own perspective. We see the world as we are, and I have a quote in here that speaks to that. We don't see, and it's a quote by Anais Nin, which you'll see, but I'll say it because it's appropriate again here. We don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. So we're always seeing the world through our lenses, our cultural lenses, our ethnic lenses, and that determines how we see the world. Okay. There's also this idea of cultural competence, okay? This is, I've underlined the words that are really important here because we're talking about all the things we said before, but it's about a continuing self-assessment. It's about being really careful paying careful attention to the dynamics of any interaction that you're having with someone. It's making adaptations, for instance, for you folks, making adaptations in how you work with people in this community, okay? And so it's coming to a place, again, it's a continuum, where you're constantly reassessing the situation. You don't just set up a bunch of rules and ways of doing things and then never change them, okay? It's a continual process. That's cultural competence. Okay, so as I mentioned, it's a continuum. And again, I'm doing a lot of talking now. We're going to get into doing some other things. But before we actually get into the whole cultural competence continuum, I would love to hear who you guys are and get to know you a little bit better. So what I'd like to do is to start with what I'm calling the name game. And what I'd love to hear is, first of all, just your name, what you do here, what it is that your particular position is here. And then I'd like to hear a little bit of the story around your name. Okay, so like where did it come from? It could be your name or a nickname, your birth name or a nickname. Where did it come from? What about your culture, caused your parents to give you that name? so that we just get to know a little bit about you and recognize that even in our names, we have all kinds of cultural influences. So I'll just start with my own. And my full name is Catherine. My middle name is Lillian. And I was named, I'm actually of German and Irish descent, but my maternal grandmother's name was Catherine, and my paternal grandmother, who I never met, her name was Lillian. So I was the firstborn granddaughter. So it was a common thing in my family that you name that firstborn after the two. I was firstborn on one side, after the two grandmothers. So that's how I got my name. And as a kid, I never liked my middle name. I love it now. But I never liked it because nobody was named Lillian of my friends or anybody that I knew in school. Of course, now I like to be different. But in those days, I didn't want to be different. So that tells you a little bit about how I got my name. And I sometimes had, a lot of people have called me Kate. Kathy was a typical nickname in the 50s when I was growing up. So that tells you a little bit about me. So I'd love to hear from each of you, who you are, what you do here, and a little bit about the narrative around your name. So would anybody like to start?
Let's start.
Thank you, everyone, for sharing that. Really appreciate it. Okay. So let's look at this whole cultural competence continuum. And I'm going to go briefly through this. You have them you have it in your handout, something that you can look at on your own. I don't want to spend a lot of time doing it. But as we're going through, be thinking if you know of either people who might fall under one of these categories, organizations that might fall under one of these categories, people that you've heard about, may not be people you know personally. But first of all, there's the cultural destructiveness, okay? This is intentionally destructive against other cultures, okay? This is, where really the culture is dehumanized. Where a group or an individual will really see a culture as less than, okay? And actually, in service, if they service that type of a group, they actually deny them access to perhaps what their natural healers, or this certainly happened a lot. Happens a lot in the Native American population, where there's a lot of natural sort of healing, and they're denied some of that in the regular medical profession. So we know certainly there are groups out there that practice that. Then we start to move up a little, and that's cultural incapacity. This is not necessarily intentionally destructive, but they really don't have the capacity to help people in the way that they really need to help them. It's kind of like, okay, I'm here to help you, but you really are lesser than me, and as long as you know your place, I'll help you. That kind of an attitude. They often will maintain discriminatory hiring practices. They have lower expectations of minorities, and they kind of give an overall general, we're here to help, but you're really not welcome kind of thing, all right? Kind of hypocritical. This whole idea of cultural blindness, you hear this, and I think people oftentimes misuse this term. Because people will say things like, well, I'm not colorblind, or I'm not culture blind. And thinking that what they're saying is that I feel everyone needs to be treated equally, which intention is coming from a good intention, right? But really, this is, when we're colorblind, what we're saying is that we almost say that culture differences or color or culture really don't make a difference, that we're all the same. Well, we're not all the same. Everybody's different. We all have equal rights and so forth, or theoretically. But it's when you ignore cultural strengths or are blind to cultural strengths, you're really missing something. Okay, it's important to take in all of the strengths within a culture and not see everybody as the same, because we're not. Okay, then you kind of move up the scale, and then you're looking at cultural pre-competence, and this is where you actually start to recognize weakness, realizes that as an agency that you might have some weaknesses in dealing with minorities. You might try experiments, you might hire staff of different cultures. Come on in, have a seat. There's a seat right over here. I'm Kathy. Hi, and what's your name?
Pearl.
Pearl. Okay, great. Or the agency will say, well, we have a commitment to civil rights. We're definitely there. But they may engage in tokenism. It's kind of like on the surface. It's not really coming from a deep sense of cultural sensitivity. Huh?
What is tokenism?
Tokenism. Anybody want to? Does anybody know what it is? Before I answer, okay. Tokenism is when you say, well, you know, we really should have, we need to have at least one Jewish person on our board, or we need to have one African American. In other words, we need a token female, or a token male, or a token this. They're only doing it because then, hey, we can say we've got this person on our board, or we've got. That's not really from a place of.
Political.
Yes, absolutely, and to be able to say and kind of look on the outside, right? Exactly, exactly. Also, they may feel a false sense of accomplishment that prevents them from moving forward. So what do you think that means? In other words, if we've put all these people on our board, well, then we don't have to do anything more in terms of being culturally sensitive because look what we've done. So it really doesn't move them forward. Then you start to get sort of to basic cultural competences. This is where you really start to see things the way that you want them to be. And this is really respecting the differences in cultures, not just saying, oh, I have a token person on here so I'm politically correct, but I really understand the differences and honor those differences. And it's also about an agency or an individual that constantly self-assesses. So this isn't just about your agency. I mean, we're talking about stuff that with relation to your agency, but think of it also in terms of yourself. You know, how often are you self-assessing? You know, thinking that you're very, you know, culturally competent when in fact you might realize that you're not as culturally competent as you thought. So it's about this constant self-assessment. You hire unbiased workers, and you actually ask the communities that you serve, what do they need? Tell me about yourselves. Tell me about your beliefs and your values so that I know. And then lastly, advanced cultural competence. This is where you really hold culture in high esteem. You really, it's a feeling of such richness that you can, like I think it's, I can speak personally just in terms of my work with having done stuff with your community, which I hadn't been familiar with before. It's so enriched my life because there were a lot of things I didn't know before, and it's so cool to me to be interacting with people who have very different beliefs and stuff. It so enriches my life. Just because I don't know everything about, say, your religion or your culture, I'd like to know more. You know what I'm saying? So that's more when you have more cultural competence. You really feel it in your heart. You advocate for it throughout the whole system. So you're actually actively doing something to really promote this. Okay, so just want you to take a look at that. This is what we really want with cultural competence. In that case, it might not have exactly happened, okay? So the other thing is I want to mention that within cultures, there's a lot of diversity, okay? So we don't want to lump a whole group of people together and say, well, this is how this group is and so forth. So we want to remember that there always is intra-cultural diversity, and that diversity can be huge, okay? And to give you an example of cultural diversity. I don't know if you can read it on the bottom, but disparate housewives. Okay, come in all shapes and sizes. Alrighty. Okay, so what I'd like you to do now is to we're going to do what's called the early memories exercise. Okay? And what I'd like to do, you know, before we start, Pearl, we went around and we had everybody say their name. And you know what? I didn't hear what people did in the agency.
Oh, we didn't get to that.
I know. So maybe we'll go around again.
Yeah.
But Pearl, we wanted to know the story around your name. Like when you were named Pearl, what's the story around that?
Okay.
Everyone said it's not just
Yeah.
you.
Yeah, we did everybody. What's your story, Pearl?
What's my story? My story is that I was named after a grandmother.
Mm-hmm.
Her name was actually, we weren't sure if it's Pearl
Mm-hmm.
or Marguerite.
Well, those are kind of very different.
Well, it actually means the same
Oh, yeah?
in two different languages.
Oh, cool.
Marguerite is
Yeah.
Hebrew.
Right.
Okay, so what
So-
does it mean?
She was, it means a pearl.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense.
Right. So I was named after her pearl.
Ah, okay, great. And you, oh, I know I'm going to have trouble with it. Yehudit. You said your name means Pearl, right? Or your middle name means Pearl. Yeah, that's right. Okay, right, good. So let me just hear what everybody does here, so I have a better sense of what you're doing here. So why don't we start,
Okay,
Isaac?
so the main focus of our agency is research and it's called Liquid Resource and Referral Center.
Right.
It's resource and referral. So there's two parts to our job. One is that many people who come in and they need help and they're not sure which programs they'll be eligible for. So they come meet us and we screen their financial situation and we see which programs they may be eligible for. That's step one. Step two is to help them apply for those programs.
So you do that personally yourself? You work
Yeah, all the
individually?
caseworkers.
So you guys are all caseworkers here at this agency? Is
She
that
does both. She's a receptionist and a caseworker.
okay? So you're a receptionist and a caseworker,
Yeah,
and
but she does the quick case.
hold on. Okay, you work in reception because I could see you say, oh, wait a minute. So you tell me what you do.
Extensive cases, but you could say.
Okay.
There are two receptionists. We give out general information, and we do all the secretarial work
Right.
and
Okay.
reception area.
Okay.
Call walk-in.
Good. Okay. And Pearl and Leah, you're caseworkers.
We're caseworkers, but I also manage a grant that we have with Department of Health
Oh, okay, great.
for immunization awareness.
Okay, good. And Nathaniel, I know you're an IT guy here, right? Is that your main thing here?
That's my only.
Okay, your only thing. That's your profession.
Yeah.
Okay, thank goodness.
Yeah.
I really needed them this morning, so that was a good thing. Okay, so so then as caseworkers, you're obviously right in constantly working with clients. All right. So just tell me a little bit about the clientele you have here. What groups do they come from? Tell me a little bit about. We're going to talk a little bit more, but just in general, who generally are your clients?
We service the Lakewood community, but not specifically the Lakewood community, but it happens to be that our clientele, the vast majority of our clientele is a local clientele, and the local community has a lot of Orthodox Jewish people and Hispanics,
Okay.
and many of them come in and they're really in bad shape. They have
So they're lower income.
the lower income
Okay.
clients, and they come in and they could have multiple problems. Some of my clients may have a disabled child, and they may have issues with SSI or SSD or
Housing, things like
in
that.
housing, and some of them face eviction. Some of them have problems. They not just eviction, for not paying rent. They face foreclosure as well. They have problems paying their mortgage, or they
Okay.
just need general budgeting. So we deal
Okay.
with people who are struggling financially.
Okay. Okay, good. So it kind of gives me an idea about who your population is. So what I'd like you to do is we're going to do what's called the early memory exercise. And what I'd like you to do is to think about your earliest memory. I mean, it may be when you were younger, it may be when you were older, but or whatever memory comes to mind that you can remember. Going back and remembering your earliest memory of a time when you came into contact with someone of a completely different background, culture. I mean, this could be age difference, religion difference, race difference, gender difference, sexual orientation difference, any kind of difference there is out there. Go back and think about the earliest memory that you have of coming into contact, in a real way, not just seeing somebody on the street, but actually having contact with someone who really was quite different from you. So just kind of take a moment to sort of remember that, okay? And what I'd like you to think about is, based on that interaction, what are some of the decisions or conclusions that you came to about that particular group that they represented? Okay, and how does that affect how you are today around that? And I'll share first, because I was thinking, okay, so let me think of what's my earliest memory, and there were a bunch of different things. But what came up for me was, I remember there was this girl in elementary school, and her name was Barbara, and she was very mentally handicapped. Okay, and in those days, definitely the school system always kept the kids who had intellectual handicaps in a separate classroom. God bless you. But she was in the regular classroom, nothing, and I didn't know. I was like 6 or 7. I was 5, I think, 5 or 6 when I first met her. But I can just picture Barbara Lyman, and she's deceased, so I can use her name. But I just remember Barbara out by the school bus, and she was constantly being teased and bullied and made fun of, and she looked different. She acted different, and she physically she just didn't look like the rest of us. And I just remember the torture that poor child must have gone through. But as a kid, her own age, watching this, I remember two things. I remember thinking that I didn't have any sense about what it meant to be like intellectually handicapped. Like I didn't, know anything about labels or anything like that. But I just remember thinking about it. Really affected me because I remember thinking about I'm never, ever, ever going to do that to anybody who's different from me. Like, because I used to see her cry, and and I was like one of the few people that was nice to her, and yet I was a little uncomfortable being nice to her. You want to fit in. But I remember thinking, and that really informed how I went forward in terms of not making judgments about other people and always feeling like I want to go out of my way to help someone who's really different, who's being hurt by other people in that case. I mean, it was, I can picture that, like, and then that was 50 some odd years ago. So, but I can picture it like it was yesterday. So that was a big experience for me.
That's a nice story.
Yeah, yeah.
Nice story.
And it doesn't, there are I was trying to think of other things where I might have had a negative connotation, because we all have those as well. But that was what came to my mind first. So anyone like to share with what they remember?
Interesting story.
Okay. Let me just, because I know you went first before, so let me just see if anybody else would like to. It's okay. It's all right.
Share an interesting story.
Okay.
My first year of college, I actually went abroad. I went to Israel,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to a school that I really wanted to go to a different school,
Right.
and the person from that school, the dean, told me go somewhere else. And I didn't do too much research on the crowd there, just on
Right.
the school, like the academics and stuff. And when I got there, I grew up in tri-state area. All my friends pretty much local. I was very used to like the New York, New Jersey kind of a lifestyle, and these girls were from all over, like totally different kind of backgrounds from me,
Mhm.
different family experiences. I can't say that it was one, we were all Orthodox, Jewish
Mhm.
Orthodox girls, so I can't say we were like so culturally different, but we came
Right,
from
right,
different
right.
backgrounds
Right,
and
right.
and different places. Like there was almost nobody from New York there or this
Mhm.
area, and it was for me. It was I felt like I was on the outside
Mm.
more than on the inside, because I think that a lot of them, because of, even though they came from different backgrounds, because they had some similarities, they were like,
Right.
they kind of connected well with each other. And it was the first time that I can remember as like a mature adult
Feeling out.
being in that kind of circumstance, because I was always like, wherever I went, I had my friends.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
And when I got there, I was like, what am I going to do? Who am I going to talk to? And over the course of the year, I, number one, went through that experience of, I was not an outcast, but not being
You didn't feel-
as culturally
right.
like in tune with everything
Right,
that's going
right,
on
right.
around me, and learning to adapt from that
Mhm.
place, which was definitely a healthy thing going into the world, because you come in contact with people that are
Sure.
constantly struggling with that. And the second thing is that I learned to really connect with these people, and I made great friends that we have lasting relationships till now, that I don't know that in any other circumstance I
Mm.
would have pushed myself to reach out and connect with such
Right.
people.
Because you wouldn't have to. In other
And
words,
that's right, and
Right.
that teaches you that there's so much. Even when you see somebody, they don't look exactly like you, they don't have the same kind of a background, same kind of experiences, same kind of thoughts on life, all that, and then you get to know them, and you can become really good friends with them, and
Right.
learn many things from them. That you realize there's a lot more to people than what you just
Mm.
at first
right.
see.
Exactly, and feel.
Exactly.
And feel. So that really informed how you go forward then in your life. So that sounds great. Thank you. Okay, Isaac, I know you were jumping here to.
Oh,
So go
no,
ahead.
I don't have to wait.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
It's all right.
No, it's
Go
not,
ahead.
my example is not really so much as a different culture, but
It doesn't any
okay.
difference.
I remember when I was in 4th grade, there was one kid who never brought snack, and I knew that kid came from a poor family,
Mm.
and I noticed by recess that kid always felt uncomfortable and different because all the other
He
kids used to
didn't.
have their snacks,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
that kid didn't have any snack at all. So
Yeah.
I felt very bad for the kid. So in the second week of school, I told my mother that we have to do something to help that kid because he really feels different and out
Yeah.
of place. So each day I used to bring 2 extra snacks, and in the morning before he used to come early, and I used to come early. So before the class came, I used to quickly give him 2 snacks, and I did that for the entire 4th grade. for the
Oh
whole
my
year.
gosh. Wow.
So,
And so how did that affect you sort of recognizing that in someone else? How did that affect
Because what
your
happened
life
was-
going forward?
no, I felt very good that I was able to help him
Mhm.
and make him feel comfortable. It wasn't even so much.
There you go. Did you bring snacks for us today, Isaac?
But it wasn't
So I
even
didn't bring one.
It wasn't even so much the food. It was more. I mean, it was the food, but it's also
Yeah.
more the feeling of that child feeling different.
Yeah.
Everyone else by recess ate snack, and
Yeah.
that child was just sitting doing nothing.
Yeah,
So
exactly. That's great at
so
that
I-
age that you know, really recognized that and then did some, not just recognized it, but did something about it. That's the
Yeah.
important thing. So good.
Thank you.
Somebody else want to share?
Trying to remember something.
I'm sure you must
Interesting
have.
stories come up. I'll think of something.
Yeah.
Either of you have something? No?
I don't remember anything that
Stands out.
stands out.
Yeah.
I grew up out of, I didn't grow up in the tri-state area.
What
I
about your
grew up
first
in Ohio.
exposure to like something
Somebody that's totally different.
Like when you met
I
people
just
that-
grew up with so much difference.
Right.
It was
You
just
didn't grow up
kind
in.
of part of me.
Mm.
It was just something like, okay,
But when
so
you
people weren't part of, since I was a kid. I mean, I'm saying, you're talking about, I was born into, my mother was involved with helping people come closer to our religion. They were in my house, and it wasn't something, and I grew up, I was in Ohio, it was like out of town. It was you just saw all
Right.
the differences.
Right.
I grew up with it. It wasn't anything.
But do you remember first noticing somebody who might be different? Like, you know, like in my case, somebody who had a mental handicap, or someone who, like I remember the first time that when I was growing up, you know, I grew up like in a middle class neighborhood and so forth. And you know, I was born in the 50s, and I remember the first time I was older, you know, actually meeting someone who was gay. For me, that was I had no judgment around it, but I just remember it was, you know, it was uncomfortable at first. I mean, you know, I don't even think about it now because, you know, but the point was that was something that was different for me and had no exposure to that. So, you know, I think that I remember the feeling of discomfort and not like, do I act normal? I mean, you know, silly things like that. But that's, you know, I'm being honest. That's how I felt. But that was really helpful to me because then, of course, it was somebody that I got to know was like this fabulous guy, and you know, we're still friends today. So that then helped me to recognize, well, just because they're different doesn't mean anything. It's just different. So. Exactly. That is the difference. That's what we were talking about, the cultural competence. It's appreciating it and really recognizing the strengths that everyone brings to the table and honoring that. So, okay. So, so I have a pretty good understanding, I think, from what you said, Isaac, what you do here, basically. And so, how much do you follow your clients through? In other words, somebody comes and for instance, they have an issue with housing or trying to find help for a child or whatever. You then follow the case all the way through to completion, and then you have follow-up, or?
That's a case-by-case basis.
Okay,
You know,
so it depends on what they need.
Some cases do require follow-up, and some cases don't require follow-up. Some clients that come in, it's a one-time shot. They come
Okay.
in, they need help with filling the application or guiding them, and you know, they're done with. And then some clients do need follow-up, so it's not all the same.
Okay. Okay. So it depends on the case. All right. So next we're going to talk about this whole CLAS standards, which are, you guys have the thicker handout is the CLAS standards, which I definitely do not want to stand up here and read these CLAS standards because it would be totally boring. And I'm sure you don't want to hear that. Right. No. It's like, you know. But I do want to, but obviously the whole, you have grant money, that's how you are having this day. And the purpose, when you receive the grant money, it's to be able to, one of the things that you have to do is to be able to offer a workshop on cultural sensitivity and to have you understand CLAS standards, okay? So before we go into what they are, and we're going to do this in kind of I think a fun way, they were designed, and CLAS stands for Culturally and Linguistically Appropriate Services. They were designed in the healthcare field. So you're going to see the language in all of this is related to healthcare, okay? Originally adopted by the Office of Minority Health, okay? So, but they were there to correct the inequities that are out there in the healthcare system. Of course, now they've been broadened to include any agencies that are accepting federal funds. But they are meant to be inclusive of any culture, all cultures. Doesn't matter the number of people within a population within your area, but anyone. You could have one person coming in speaking, you know, whatever, some crazy language, and you still are responsible to adapt to that. But it addresses the needs of racial, ethnic, and linguistic populations who have unequal access to services. Provides a common understanding, a structure. It's basically a structure so that you can implement services that meet the needs of the culture. Let me mention also another word that's going to come up in when you read this is LEP, which stands for Limited English Proficiency. Okay, that's the terminology they're using in this. So that's basically the purpose of the class of CLAS, culturally and linguistically appropriate services. Okay, so what we're going to do, this is how we're going to do it. First of all, they're in different levels. They're mandated levels. And you're going to see when you look through that the standards 4, 5, 6, and 7 are mandated. And what that means is they're required by any agencies that's accepting federal funds. Okay, you have to comply. They then have some that are recommended. Okay, and what they mean is they're actually recommended for adoption as mandatory. Okay, by an agency, by state agencies. And then they have a suggested and an optional one. We're going to look at, today we're going to look at 7 of them, in January we're going to look at the other 7. So what I'm going to do here, like I said, I don't want to just be, because it's just like words, you know, but we're just going to look at those. I'll read each one over. Then what I'm going to ask you to do, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, so there's 7. So it's not an even number, but what we'll do is going to get into 2 groups. And you're going to, there's highlighters on each desk. You can either stay in here, you could, if it's more comfortable out in that entryway, you can do that, whatever's comfortable in the other room. And your group is going to get together and you're going to elect someone as a secretary or reporter, I guess you could say. And you're going to go through this together. What I gave you is the executive summary for each mandate, okay? You're going to go through it with a highlighter. Everybody has a highlighter. You're going to go through it as a group and highlight the words that you think are really important in that executive summary around the mandate. And then what I want you to do is, as a group, I want you to put in your own language, relative to what you do here, what this means to you. I also want you to take note of your feelings around it. You know, because we get these things that we're mandated to do or whatever, and we may have feelings around it. Well, gee, that doesn't seem fair, or oh my gosh, how are we supposed to do this, or whatever comes up for you. And I ask today that you be really honest. Don't always just be saying or doing what's politically correct. Really be honest with feelings. So talk about what comes up for you when you're reading this. You know, you're going to highlight the important words that you think are significant and stand out for you with regard to this. You're going to try to, as a group, put it into your own everyday language words, okay? And you're going to talk about what it feels like and how easy you feel, easy or not, you feel this would be to implement within your agency, or if you're doing it already, okay? So, and this may be helpful too, because if there's something, and especially being new on board, is this might help you to look at, okay, where are we, you know, actually fitting the bill, and where might we need to make some improvements? So it's helpful. Okay, so you're clear on that, what you're going to do? So why don't we have 3, Sarah, are you going to be able to do this, be part of this, or not? So I know in terms of dividing up the group. Okay, so why don't we have you 3 be one group, you 4 be another group, all right? So again, you're clear on what you're going to take this one. And what I want is group A, you guys be group A, you guys be group B, and group A is going to look at 4 and 5, and group, what did I say, you're A?
We're A.
Yeah. Group A is going to look at 4 and 5, and group B is going to look at 6 and 7. Okay? No.
This was stiff work here.
No, no, no.
Stiff classwork.
Okay?
When you say 4, you mean page 4?
No, mandate 4. So the first mandate is, the first standard that's mandated is standard number 4. And basically this is required for all federal fund recipients, and it says that healthcare organizations must offer and provide language assistance services, including bilingual staff and interpreter services, at no cost to each patient or consumer with limited English proficiency, known as LEP for short, at all points of contact in a timely manner during all hours of operation. Let's look at each mandate and what each group came up with. So the group that had 4 and 5, who's Leah is the spokesperson, right? So why don't you tell us, Leah, why don't you first of all read the mandate, and what would you do, because actually Pearl had a experience with that, a client that was, what if, because your client actually spoke, read lip, had, what do you call it?
Lip service.
Yeah, lip reading, did lip
Right.
reading. But what if they didn't?
So we were discussing what possibilities we had, and we were wondering if it would qualify. We can communicate with them in writing. Does that qualify as having the option available for communication?
Pearl said she did some of that, right? In addition
Right.
to lip reading.
But she's saying writing. What if they don't read lips?
Yes, so
Right, so that's what I
she
said
said
as
she did
well.
some right. She did some.
Oh,
in
I
addition
didn't
to
hear
lip
you say that.
reading.
Oh, okay. So in other words, you wrote out stuff so they could read. Right. Okay.
Wrote back.
Okay. Okay.
So writing is one option. Now, just from our group, a suggestion would be because it does say that for every patient, and then it goes on to say that you must have it for people that even come in infrequently. It might make sense to have, and I give a suggestion here, to have a telephone interpreter service can be used as a supplemental system when an interpreter is needed instantly or when services are needed in an unusual or infrequently encountered language. So this would be, according to Natano's knowledge, there's such services, you can contract them, they can be available, you call
And
them
they're on a
up.
per use.
Yeah,
Those you don't have to
per
pay the
use.
constant of per
It's
use.
expensive per minute, but it's much
It's-
cheaper than
it's
having
cheaper than
someone
having an
that's
annual
infrequent.
contract.
Yeah.
Exactly.
But you have to sign up ahead of time. In other words, you have to have them on board or whatever.
Right, you have to have an account.
Right.
with us.
I mean, we
account.
can look into the options, but this is
Right.
something that we do have to be aware of, that we're responsible for. And the sign language, I don't know what the law is here, but I'm imagining if we can communicate in writing, we're covered.
Mhm.
We highlighted the main languages that our organization does come in contact with most frequently, just to make sure that we are covered on all grounds for typical circumstances, and that would be English, Hebrew, Yiddish, and Spanish.
Right. We
Mhm.
came to the same conclusion in our
Mm.
group.
So,
Mm.
and
And we said we're covered
right
for
now
that.
we're covered for that, right? So
Right.
that was number 4, standard 4.
Okay. Let's go to standard 5.
Am
Go
I
ahead.
continuing?
Mhm.
Okay, standard 5. Healthcare organizations must provide to patients, consumers, in their preferred language, both verbal offers and written notices, informing them of their right to receive language assistance services. So this would probably be, and if you read the fine print, it would require you to have signs in all points of contact in your organization that state that these languages are available. That would probably be for our reception area. It says that all entrances, so I guess that would also mean a sign by the back door in case people walk in, and in the offices of the caseworkers. Those are
Mhm.
points of contact.
Now,
Right.
What information do we have that really,
language they speak?
do we
Yeah,
speak
yeah,
about our
I'm gonna say
intake
about
Our
our
form?
intake form asks
We
what's
We don't
should
have
add,
that.
It's on our-
we should add language
We-
preference.
Oh, that's what I was
something which
asking,
we have
because
to
our
add.
intake form asks
I
that.
don't
On a
think so, we
database,
should
we
add
have
that.
it for sure.
Mm.
But in the database, we now have an option. So it does say that you have to explicitly inquire about the preferred language. So I imagine that by putting in the intake form a slot that says what is your preferred language, then
We don't have
we're
I
inquiring
thought
about
we should
it.
have an intake form in Spanish.
Yeah, I was gonna
It's
say
on
something else.
Why
That
So
don't
is-
if
I
you
know
intake form in
it's
Spanish, you still have to. It says
You
over here
still
you
have
have to
to
explicitly
inquire.
inquire about the preferred language
Now,
and
even if it does
record
say
this
that in the intake
information.
form, if they don't know English, then it's not gonna.
Well, right, it won't
they
make a
don't know what it
point.
means.
That's what I'm saying, so
Doesn't ask.
it's, oh, wow, so first of all, on our intake form, we have to have
It
a
doesn't
thing for
ask what
preferred language. And,
And it says here you have to record this information in all records. So that would mean that this is like a mandatory thing that has to be recorded in the database. We must fill it out for every person.
Right. So whoever is working with that person knows what, it's written. They don't have to. It's written.
Right.
This is their preferred language.
But we have to make sure that question's there, and we also have to record it because not everything that gets written automatically goes into
Sometimes
electronic
Right.
they put
database.
another.
Right. Right.
It
Right.
has to be.
Right.
No,
Right.
there is a field
One more
already, I
thing.
think. You just
Language.
have to-
Probably.
Yes,
Preferred
but
language?
we don't use
Yeah.
it. We don't use
Yeah,
it.
there are actually 3 fields. It's
Hmm.
both languages.
Really?
You never
Okay.
use it.
We never use it.
Well, now you'll be using it,
And
right?
then the
Well, first you have to fill
signs.
us out on the intake form.
now, we should have an intake form in Spanish, should we not?
Yeah.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes. Because if you look at number 4. Now, how do we? I have to go back, right? Whoop.
But what
That's
about
it.
the people
Sorry.
that are doing
Um, Okay, they have to have all points of contact.
No, I'm talking about
So,
overlap this whole
In
thing.
other words, you have to be able to offer them in their
Just
preferred
do it on the
language
phone?
at all points of contact.
Do it off by
that you're working with that person. So from the moment they kind of come into the bill, come into your office to the point they leave, and any follow-up has to be in their language. Because, like we were saying, there could be a family feud going on, or the kid doesn't want the mother. You know what I'm saying? Like, you don't know if you're getting if they're getting the right information.
You have to first offer the service. Even if they're
Right.
booking it, you have to make sure they're
Right. Right. They can, as it says, they can accept on request by patient. So the patient or the consumer can request that they have a family member. But if you have an ongoing relationship, you want to make sure that they're getting the information that they
And that
need.
you're getting it accurately, and that
Right, and that
servicing
you're
them
giving it
properly.
to them accurately. Right, exactly. So, okay, good. I'm not an expert on the CLAS standards. My understanding is that they've been created, and actually in the beginning of I think in the beginning of the thing. Anyway, I'll look at it later. It talks about the fact that they were originally stated for healthcare organizations, but that it is required that you follow this if you are receiving federal funds. So I think Thania brought up a good point that, well, technically by law, you could argue that it says right in the thing, healthcare organization, and you're not. So although you have a healthcare component, right?
It says that only healthcare services
Right.
need to be
It's
provided.
health
The
services.
specific
Health
services, not just type of organization.
The
I
first
would-
one-
Right.
The way I would see it is that a healthcare service, their medical services can be compromised, mistakes can be made, they can be very
Right, it's
costly
it's
in
much more
terms of law.
dangerous.
It's much more dangerous.
Right.
We should follow as much as possible, because it definitely augurs better for us, and there are a lot of grants and things that ask you.
Well,
what are
right,
you
if you're
doing?
receiving federal funds.
And the truth of the matter is that it makes us more effective.
Right.
So we don't have to probably make ourselves crazy, whereas they don't have a choice,
Right.
and they have to
Right.
do it, come
That
what
was
may.
exactly my question.
Yeah, I
Because
don't-
If you go to the extreme, you can find a case where you simply
Oh, I
cannot
know.
provide translation.
Right.
What if it's a, I don't know, deaf, blind, and mute person who doesn't have any relatives?
Right.
How do you speak to him?
Yeah.
A lonely.
They won't come
But
here.
it says you must.
Well, the point is, yeah, I don't know what the
Well, in a hospital
liability
setting, in a
is.
healthcare setting, they have to find something
Yeah.
to do it. I don't know.
For you guys, yeah, they would in a hospital setting, they would have to.
look
But
what
for
it
you
says.
guys,
What it needs to say is, but it definitely.
wait, hold on,
It says
hold on.
right here, it says that. It says,
Where are you at? What page are
organizations
you at?
in 7. Organizations should provide notice of availability of oral translation of written materials to LEP individuals who cannot read or who speak non-written
He
languages.
cannot hear and speak either.
Materials in
Oral
alternative formats.
translation.
One second. Materials in alternative formats should be developed for those individuals as well for people with sensory, developmental, and cognitive
Yeah,
impairments.
so we just said
So with that brand.
that's
How do we do
really, that's an extreme.
You mean if
But
somebody's
Fred
blind,
said that-
deaf, they can't
Yeah,
speak?
doesn't have relatives.
I mean,
You cannot translate.
I feel bad
They
for
weren't
that
able to get
person.
to
No, but the truth is that if ever such a person would walk in, we have to know that's our responsibility.
Yeah.
At
To
that
attempt
point.
Right.
to try.
Figure out
Right.
how am I going to help get
That
services
was-
to this
you know,
person.
I think the purpose of this is you won't look down upon
It's
them.
awareness.
You won't just, it's awareness.
Right.
You won't just dismiss them.
Oh, we
You know-
can't help you because
right,
we don't
right,
speak your
right.
language.
You know that you will try as
Right.
best as you
And
can, and at
also
the end of the day, you
usually-
might not succeed, but at least you will not have looked
Right.
down upon them, gotten rid of them, dismissed them. You will have
Right.
validated them.
And
you
you're
will
supposed to provide. I don't know I think it's a good question, like what happens if you don't, and you're not a healthcare
have,
agency.
somebody-
But that's a good thing
case-
to
you
look
need-
into.
You need, case, how's it called in law?
Oh, like,
prior case,
I know.
Precedent.
Yeah, like a precedent?
Oh, yeah.
Well, you
Oh,
know,
Precedent.
Precedent?
precedent, right?
yeah.
You have to see how, 'cause
Yeah.
if someone took it to a legal
Right.
level, then yes,
Right.
then you could be.
So I
held
don't
liable.
know. I don't know for an agency such as yours that's not a
Most
healthcare.
probably could, with this, take it to the next level.
Yeah. So, but I think your point is well taken. It's about awareness. It's about you want to have a friendly organization that's friendly to all and inclusive of all. Okay, what I need everyone to do is to look at the list that you have up here and pick 3 areas or 3 groups and write down at least 4 stereotypes that are known about that group or that you've heard about that group or whatever. And then what I'd like you to do is to come up with balancing statements for that group that really counteract that argument or that stereotype. That either as an example, a specific example of somebody that you know, somebody perhaps it could be in your community, could be in your family, could be yourself, could be somebody that you don't know but that you've heard about. So either way, please work together in pairs to do that. Okay. Okay, what were you saying?
I wanted to ask you if you could, I like
So, if you were in one of these and you heard a whole bunch of stereotypes out of them, what does that feel like? What do you,
I would say that's not me. That's not
right?
me. I
And
don't
yet,
like that.
other people are going to think that you are because they have a stereotype about it. So, where do they come from? Where do stereotypes come from?
A natural judgmental inclination that we all have.
Okay. So some sort of a natural, in other words, you're feeling that we naturally judge, we naturally,
I think most people
okay.
have some elements of that.
Why? Why do you think we judge?
There is always fear of
You want me to
strangers.
tell you
Okay,
something
so
about
it comes from
that?
fear. It really comes from a sense of fear. You're different from me. Different. The unknown is scary. The unknown is scary, and therefore we tend to keep our distance.
Might also
So they come from a lot of course, they're socialized most of the time, much of the time. We learn that as a young child, or as an adolescent or whatever, or their societal beliefs or familial beliefs. And how are they perpetuated?
Part of the culture.
Yeah,
Word
this.
of mouth.
Well, the sad part is that they're. I mean, and I would be the first one to admit that I've certainly been involved in situations, and I think of myself as a very non-judgmental, open-minded person. But I can say that there have been times I've told jokes, or I've maybe heard people saying something about a particular group or whatever, and I don't join in necessarily, but I don't stop it. Okay, I've been in those situations when I was younger. We all do that. For the most part, I would say most people do that. Okay? And again, a lot of it, like you're saying, Nathaniel, it's out of fear. It's out of fear because we don't really understand another group. And all we know is also, our news media. Our news media is incredible in terms of creating stereotypes. We only hear about the negative stuff about certain groups. So they're perpetuating it. What about, actually, we brought this up here, positive stereotypes. Because when we're talking about stereotypes, it doesn't mean it's negative. But what about a positive stereotype? Is that something that's good, or is that something we think should continue or not? What do you think
No.
about that? Okay, why? Why do you think
The
it?
same way you don't have negative about every group, you're not going to have positive about every group.
Okay, right. So if, for instance, that you had someone stereotyped you but in a positive way, how could that be? Why might that be difficult for you?
Why? Because if I would know that there's other people or other things in my group that are doing other things that are not the right thing, or they're doing things that are really on the negative side,
Okay.
I wouldn't. I mean, why? It's
But
painting
it
a false
paints them
picture. It's really.
bad.
Okay.
You don't want to be
Okay.
part of it.
Right. But if, let's say, there was a stereotype, what would be like a positive stereotype of somebody? Like that you're
Smart.
really, really smart, okay? What if that was not necessarily true? In other words, we think of that as a positive. What I'm asking is, how could that be a negative? If my stereotype of you was that you're really brilliant.
So why does
Then
somebody
someone has to live
unemployed?
up to those
Exactly.
expectations, and
Yes.
they can't.
Right. Because it's always then about having to live up to certain expectations, also allowing other people who might not see themselves as bright and intelligent feel inferior to you without even knowing you. But they think, oh, she's so bright. You know what I'm saying? So positive stereotypes can be just as damaging in many ways. I don't know if I'd say just as, but can be damaging. So you want to be careful of positive ones. Is there any group that's unaffected by stereotyping? None that I've ever come across. Okay, so let's hear some balancing statements. Anyone want to share a particular stereotype that they came up with that they have a balancing statement for?
We have the worksheet. Is that what
Yeah,
you're
yeah, that's what I mean.
Okay. Does anybody else want to start?
Go right ahead.
Fine,
You
all
do
right.
not.
Okay, so this really Nathaniel gets most of the credit for this, but
Oh, no.
I'm just going
No
to
doubt.
read it. Okay, so low-income families.
Okay.
Low-income families, so we said a lot of them may be uneducated. Some of them may be lazy. Some of them may not be the most hygienic. And some of them, many may question that, why do they have such large families if they don't have much money?
Okay. Okay, so
Okay.
those are some typical stereotypes of low-income families.
Mhm.
Okay. So what are some of the balancing
Okay,
statements
so
you
the
found?
balancing statement for uneducated is that, no, many are very educated who are just laid off or just can't find a job or are not in the right position to get a job, but they're very educated.
Okay.
And to say that they're lazy, that's not true. Many of them are very hardworking people, and they just don't make much money, but they're very hardworking people.
And
And
also that a lot of immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
There's-
Brilliant education.
Right? There's language barriers.
Academics and
Yep.
in the native country over here, they can
Absolutely.
tell you.
I was working with a whole group of people who they were Haitian immigrants who in their own country were doctors and lawyers, and they were working, as housekeepers and janitors and so forth because they couldn't. They were highly
They
educated.
can confirm the education, or
Right.
they can find somebody.
Absolutely.
and the fact that they have large families and a low income is not a contradiction. They're very happy with not living a high lifestyle and yet feel accomplished and happy with having a large family. That's their true asset.
Okay.
And what else did we cover? Oh, hygienic? No, many of them are very clean and they just don't have that luxury that some of the wealthy people have. But as far as hygienics are concerned, they're very hygienic.
Mm? Okay, good.
All right.
Thank you. So anyone want to share anything else that you came up with?
On this topic,
Yeah.
we also had down that people may think that they're unambitious or that they,
You're talking about low income families,
you
right?
know, families. A lot of times they have a low self-esteem because of their situation,
Mhm.
but they do know how to live with less and they're usually resourceful, like they know
Very.
how to, stretch the dollar.
Mhm.
But what we came up with is that in this economy, low-income families did not necessarily choose to be that way, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they
Mhm.
are inferior.
Right. Okay, good. Good. Anybody else? You don't want to share your example?
That was not mine. That was actually Yudit's that she decided to say
About you?
somebody in this room.
Oh,
that
sorry.
not
I'm
all
sorry.
students are nerds and
Oh.
hardworking and teachers' pets and outcasts, and that she knows somebody that was valedictorian is not an outcast. So I don't know why she decided to say that. The reason why I'm saying this is because I used to be an extremely studious student and hardworking. I mean, still I'm very hardworking, but I'm really not that way anymore. If I was being scoring, I would not be valedictorian, so it's fine.
Uh-huh. But the thing is that we tend to think, that people like that are, nerdy and they don't have a social life and we have all these stereotypes around that when in fact, I don't know if you're a nerd, what's nerdy anyway? Nerdy is defined by each person differently. But,
I don't know. Everyone has to decide.
all right, we'll vote. No, I'm only kidding.
I don't think I'm like that anymore. So
Uh-huh.
there's nothing to do with me. The statement that she decided to say.
Okay, we hear you.
From school, so. Oh, she never been to school for? I mean, we were in different.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
You were known far and wide,
As
that's
in-
what you're saying.
She must have been the nerd of the school.
Okay, all right, thank you. Anyone else want to share anything that you came up with?
We have seniors. We came up with something
Oh.
for
I think
seniors.
Essence are better.
Okay, all right, go ahead, and then you guys do one. Go ahead.
Okay, seniors, some of them are grumpy. Some of them are perceived as non-productive.
Okay, hold on. Grumpy, non-productive. This is seniors. Grumpy, non-productive.
Some of them are perceived as slow, they have a slow learning curve. And others perceive them as being stubborn.
Okay.
Okay, so now the balancing statement would be, we have many old sages who we turn to. One of the things we said is that they're non-productive.
Right, and they have a slow learning.
Okay, so the non-productive balancing statement would be that there's many great scholars. I'll just give a name that other people in the room know who this person is, Rabbi Elyashiv, or some other very old scholars who all the people in the community turn to them for their great sage advice.
Right,
So
because they probably
we
wouldn't
view
have
them
it
as
if
the
they
most-
weren't older.
Yeah, we view them as the most productive people. Okay, then the grumpy part. Let me take these slow learning curves. The people think that they slow learning curve and they don't learn things at a later stage in life. So you helped me out with this. You said that Grandma Moses, she became a painter later on in life in her 90s. Can you imagine?
Right.
Okay. And then we said that many of them are stubborn, but that's not necessarily true. many people, I'm just gonna, I mean, this is who I know about it. It's in all religions and ethnicities. Take Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. That's another great scholar. It's a custom that by one's funeral, they ask, they apologize and they ask for forgiveness from the wife, just in case they did anything throughout their lives that they may have hurt them. So when he gave a eulogy on his wife, he didn't ask for forgiveness for his wife. So somebody came over to him after and he said that this is a custom which is done by when one eulogizes one's wife. They ask for forgiveness. Why did you do this custom? Is it a custom? He says, well, I know for a fact that all the years that I lived with her, I never said anything which could have even possibly hurt her. On the contrary, I always honored her more than myself. So that's why.
Okay.
And he was a very old man when his wife passed away.
And
so
he wasn't grumpy.
To say that the little stubborn is
stubborn.
proved by somebody like him.
Okay.
No,
so you're
it's
saying
true.
it did hold
It's
up
very
the
true.
stereotype.
What?
You're saying it held the stereotype.
No,
That he-
I'm disproving it. A lot of people say that they're
Oh, I thought you meant stubborn
He's saying
meaning.
that- no, he's saying
Oh, okay, I
stubborn
gotcha, I
means
gotcha.
stubborn is a negative. Stubborn like...
Right, I thought you meant that he was stubborn. He wasn't going to
That's
change
why they
his
don't go
view.
for
Yeah, exactly. Like that he wasn't going to change that he wasn't going to apologize. Never mind.
No, but
Yeah,
he was
she
really...
took the other side of it.
No, but I hear what
And
you're
the person
saying.
came over to him and said, why didn't you ask for Mechila? So he said, I didn't have to. So she thought he was holding stubborn.
Right,
his
that I'm not
approach
going
that I
to
don't
apologize.
No,
right.
the point is that he was so
Yeah,
careful
no,
every
I-
single day of his life, that he was so polite and so...
Of course, you'd have
been
right.
stubborn.
Of course, you'd have to ask the wife, and the wife wasn't
But
there.
he was so sure that he was so gentle
So
and
he
so...
couldn't have been
Right.
stubborn, because had he been stubborn,
I gotcha.
that wouldn't have been the
Right,
case.
gotcha.
exactly.
Okay.
Okay, so we have one more thing. Okay, so you spoke about slow learning curve, grumpy, non-productive. I think we covered everything, did we?
I think
Okay,
so.
I think so, yeah.
What, anybody? What else? What did you got? Anything you guys had?
Yes, we did. Go
Well,
ahead.
we did special ed students.
Okay.
Most people would look at them as kind of stupid,
Mm-hmm.
and they have no feelings. We can kind of say anything around
Right.
them. They're just like oblivious to everything.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of times people would look at them as like just unkept and
Yeah.
not clean. And
Mm-hmm.
so those are like some of the stereotypes that people would have. To counter that, I mean, we just said, that there's one of us has a neighbor that is a special ed student, and the child is part of everybody on the block,
Mm-hmm.
gets involved in all the activities of the kids, and does everything, and even is kind of mainstream part of the day
Yeah.
with the regular class.
Well, that's the interesting part because special ed nowadays, if you can be in special ed because you have a physical handicap. Okay, you're still classified as special
But
ed.
we were counting all that under special
Right.
ed.
Right. So in other words, people don't but we have, we often have that stereotype that special ed means that it's got to be a kid who has a mental handicap. But special ed covers all kinds of things now, and there are many, many, many children in special ed. So, good job. Okay. So how realistic is it to what we just did? How realistic is this whole idea of having balancing statements and thinking differently? Like, how realistic do you think that is?
Really, it's realistic for yourself, to work on yourself,
Mhm.
but you're not going to change the whole world.
Okay.
Because the world out there is like, all of these stereotypes that
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, but if you change yourself, what
change
happens?
the world.
There you go.
One person at a
One person at a time. I mean, it's so trite. We hear it all the time, and it sounds trite, but it's so true that when you start to change, you start to notice that first of all, your immediate people changing slightly, and then they change, and it's a ripple. It really is a ripple. I mean, I can testify to that in my own life. So you're right. You can't change anybody else. But if you as an agency here are acting in certain welcoming ways and being open to all, that affects the community around you. But it may not always be easy for us to not have stereotypes. They're all around us. They're on the news. They're in our families. They're in the neighborhood. They're all over the place. So it's tough not to get stuck into stereotypes. How many of you have ever been victimized in a stereotypical way, stereotyping way, by others, and really felt that you were the victim?
Not myself. I have a daughter who's in special education. She's a reading specialist,
Mm-hmm.
and she worked in a, now a lot of my kids have worked in, non-Jewish settings, so it's not an uncommon thing.
Right.
And she was in a public school system in some little town in New Jersey, not near Lakewood. And she was really a victim, no matter what she did. I think that it was based on jealousy.
Was it because she was Jewish, or she doesn't?
We don't know whether it was Jewish or whether it was because she was very successful and
Yeah.
the department head couldn't deal with it. But in the end, she just left.
Yeah.
They were thinking of taking like some sort of measures because she was really hounded.
Wow. How
And she's
did
very open-minded, and she doesn't even look, very like Hasidic or anything
Right.
like that.
How did she handle it? How did she deal with that?
It was a lot of stress on her life. It was a lot of stress. She tried, sending emails to the higher ups and talking with them, and they really worked on it. Her husband's a very bright fellow, and they tried working on it together. And at the end, so there would be little pockets where she'd be a little nicer.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it was just so pressurizing that she left that place.
That's too bad. That's too bad. And that happens all the time. Unfortunately, that can happen a lot. Okay. How did this, just talking about this, I mean, this really wasn't a deep exercise. It was just kind of a general thing. But it was to make you kind of look at,
But it makes you aware.
think about it.
Makes you think about it,
Yeah.
Because
we don't.
really, like we said before, you need to internalize it a little bit. If you do it just from the outside, they get the feeling. Like if you're like being nice, but you don't really feel it, it doesn't go over that well. You
Yeah.
don't do that ripple effect so
Right.
nicely, like you said.
Right.
So if it makes us introspect and think about it, so our actions will reflect that. So it's like no one's changing, but the subtleties.
Well, right.
Take a different.
It's about maybe when you leave this room or whatever that you start to take more notice of any time you hear someone using a stereotype. Thinking a stereotype. You just see it if you notice it on television, or if you notice it, in your family, or you notice it in, your wherever you are, and just start to be more aware of it. Okay? And I talked about in the beginning that self-awareness is such an important part of cultural competency. It's about really being able to be aware of who you are, what you believe, what you think. And most of us think we know that, but then we get surprised when we get in certain situations and we realize that maybe we did have a stereotype, or maybe we did have a prejudice that we didn't realize. So it's really about looking at ourselves. So again, this would be the place we were going to do this other exercise. We're going to save that for next time. But what I want to ask you, has anyone in I'd say maybe the past few years of your life, had any kind of aha moment about yourselves in terms of how you see the world, or how you interact with others, whether it be anybody, whether it be someone from another group or whatever? Anyone do, let me ask this a different way. How many of you do self-reflection on a regular basis? Most of us, when we're getting into, say, an issue with a spouse or a friend or maybe a coworker, we tend to see things, obviously, from our perspective. And we tend to, for the most part, many of us tend to see the other person as the person at fault. And so it's very hard for us to reflect on maybe what our motives were, or what we got out of the situation or wanted to get out of it. And so self-reflection, yes, it really can be very, very helpful in looking, and always be looking deeper for a deeper reason why you do something. Really be looking at, well, what was my responsibility in that interaction? Because we hardly ever do that. And if we can do that, we're going to be we're going to have such healthier relationships all around. So we're not going to do the okay. What does that say? Anybody
Now
see?
here.
Okay, I like the way you said, it's now here. Okay, how many of you saw opportunity is nowhere? Okay, how many of you saw opportunity is now here? Besides you. Okay, so basically, if you saw it, it's a bunch of letters up on the thing, okay? But if you saw it as opportunity is nowhere, okay, that energy is very different than if you saw it as opportunity is now here, right? Because you're going to think, feel, and act differently if you think opportunity is nowhere. than if you think opportunity is now here. Okay, so what do you take from this? What does this mean? Why did I even put it up there? Huh?
Should it mean something?
Should
it mean something?
Sure, it means something.
Should it mean something?
Yes, but what does it mean? What do you think it means?
It shows how you look at things.
It may not mean
Everything is in the attitude. And
Yeah,
everything
it's
is how you
all
look at
about
it.
perception. Remember I said that quote in the beginning, and I think I actually have it on here. No, never mind. Anais Nin, that we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are. Okay, so we're always looking through a perceptual lens. So however you see that is going to do, whatever lens you see that through is going to determine how you feel and act. Okay, so that's just really important to be. Why do you think? How does that relate to cultural competence and stereotypes and awareness and all that?
How you look at things.
But determines how they are actually. So there's, in some ways, there's not even a reality outside of how we see things.
Right.
You know,
Most of the time there isn't.
right, exactly, because that becomes your reality. However you see it is your reality. Okay, so it's really important to keep that in mind when we're talking about cultural competence. Okay, anyone familiar with cognitive behavioral restructuring, cognitive behavioral therapy, things like that? Okay, it's very basic, and it's based on the idea, again, you have a thought, you have a feeling, and you have an action or a behavior. Okay, so if you most of the time we're focusing in on our feelings. Okay, but if you have a feeling, always ask yourself, what's the thought that's creating that feeling? Okay, you never have a feeling without having a thought first. It doesn't happen. We're not always aware of the thoughts. So, like for instance, as a coach, one of the things I help people do is to look at, well, what is that little voice saying inside, or what did you tell yourself before, someone says, well, I'm really feeling frustrated over such and such. Okay, so tell me about that frustration. What's the thought that's creating that feeling? Well, boy, I've been really trying to, I've applied for all these jobs and I keep getting told no, that I'm not educated enough and blah, blah, blah. That's where my frustration is, okay? So I help them look at, well, so tell me a little bit more about that thought. And usually it comes down to something about themselves that they believe. They're not good enough, or, they don't, it usually comes down to what we call in coaching gremlins, which is, I'm not good enough. But the point is that thoughts lead to feelings, lead to behaviors, okay? So this is important to think of in terms of when we're looking at cultural sensitivity. How you think about something will cause a feeling to come up, because feelings don't come up without thoughts first, okay? And then that causes a behavior. And that we do oftentimes tell someone to act as if, and then that brings on the feeling. But
Maybe it's both ways.
yeah, I think I think generally when we look at stuff,
happy, when you're happy, you smile.
right.
So.
But what I'm interested in is looking beneath that and really looking at how do they feel. Okay, so identity circles, just kind of a fun thing to look at. If you put your name in the middle and just look at what are 4 things, important aspects of your identity. If you could only pick 4 things that if someone who didn't know you saw this, they would know something. They would have a sense of who you are. Okay.
Like what aspects of my personality?
Anything, it doesn't have to be your personality, just aspects of what are the things that help to make you who you are, your identity. Like, I might put, okay, so I put Kathy, I might put mother, okay, I'm a mom. But I also might put that I'm I love to have fun. Okay, so because those are things that if somebody didn't know me, I'd want them to know that that's an important aspect of my identity.